Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to our ritual night talk for this week. I'm just going to say this week because, as you can see, I'm behind on the schedule again. It's the weekend and I'm posting the video. So, we're going to try and get a little more back on track with the schedule going forward, but we're still kind of picking up a little bit from some of the stuff with the Office of the Readings and so forth. So, I appreciate your patience with that, but the schedule will be getting back on track soon. And we'll be posting these on Tuesdays or Wednesdays. So, I'm Scott Stenwick. I'm your host for these Ritual Night events, presented under the auspices of Leaping Laughter OTO in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, tonight what I'm going to talk about is elemental magic. And so this is more of a general topic. It's not necessarily a specific ritual, although, it is certainly relevant to the greater ritual of the pentagram, which is what you use to work with the elements. And I've included a link to an article on the greater ritual of the pentagram with this video. Also included a very, very good source on looking at all sorts of stuff related to the elements from a guy named John Opsapaus, who is the author of the Pythagorean Tarot and some other books on the Greek esoteric doctrine of the elements. And that talks about elements and powers and things. I'm going to summarize that a little bit here, but there's a lot there. You can really dig through that site and you can find all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of different applications for those ideas. So that's a really good link. Don't just watch the video. Go check out that link, if you're interested in working with the elements and so on, because there's a lot of great material there. I've also included the donation link as usual. No donations are too small. All donations go to support the operation of Leaping Laughter OTO here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And anything you can give is always appreciated. So with that, I'm going to start in on talking about the elements. Now, one of the first things about the elements that you gotta understand is, there's this thing going around on Facebook, and it's shows, periodic table of the elements with, all the elements we know about up to, 100 and whatever. And then, ancient table of the elements. It's air, fire, earth, water. It's the idea being that, of course, these ancient people were all completely ignorant about this, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's not quite true. And the reason is that the word element is actually being used in a different way between the two systems. So when you're looking at the periodic table, that's, the atomic number, the composition of materials, and so on. But the ancient concept of the elements are based on the states of matter. So what you've got is, right, so you have, earth is solid, water is liquid, air is gas, and fire is plasma. And then spirit could be thought of as energy. Okay, so that's what you're looking at there. And so once you understand that, you realize that, any substance over here on the periodic table could manifest as one of these ancient elements depending on the situation. So I'm going to take water. Okay, I freeze it. Okay, now it's a solid. That's earth. I turn it to liquid. Okay, it's water. I put a fire under it, turn to steam. Okay, now it's a gas. It's air. And so that is really what is going on when you're comparing the ancient elements to the modern elements. We have the exact same concept as the ancients in physics. We use it for all kinds of things with states of matter. And it's not the same thing as, they have fire and water, and we've got hydrogen and helium and, and so on. So that is a fundamental difference in thinking between modern elements and ancient elements. Furthermore, the Greeks had a whole system of how the elements are generated and how they work that was based on observation of the natural world and actually did not work that badly. Okay? So, in the Greek concept of the elements arise from qualities called the four powers. Okay? And the four powers are warm, cool, moist, and dry. Okay? And so fire is warm and dry. Air is warm and moist. Water is cool and moist, and earth is cool and dry. Okay? So those combinations of the powers come together to produce, air, earth, fire, water. In the original Greek conception, there wasn't really a concept of spirit, but the concept of the powers are still relevant. So what we would talk about, adding heat to something, okay, that's exposing it to infrared energy. The Greeks would see that as exposing something to the warm power. Okay, and you could take a look at this like, okay, you're cooking something, right? Okay, and you're cooking your food, and the thing it's coming out is too watery. Well, what do? Well, if you leave it on the heat for longer, expose it to more of the warm power, what happens is that the water, okay, which is cool and moist, the warm power negates the cool and ultimately overcomes it, changing it from cool and dry to moist and dry. And then that becomes air, which is steam, which escapes, and that reduces the water in your food. The ancient Greeks also invented the steam engine. They didn't actually use it for manufacturing or anything, but it was largely based on this principle. All right, take water, right, liquid, pour it into a vessel. And how theirs worked was it's like a round vessel that I think it rotated and had like a couple of valves coming off it, and so you'd run it, it would spin. But from the gas escaping from the valves, like in these two directions, and so anyway, but okay, so we'll take a vessel, we'll put like two valves on it, facing in the direction away from how we want it to spin, and we'll put the warm power under the water, and that exposing the water to the warm power, or fire, okay, which is primarily warm. What you have is fire confers the warm power to the water, which overcomes the cool power, transforms it into air. The air escapes, causes the thing to spin. And there's actually a lot of things that you could do looking at the way the powers work. So the other thing to keep in mind is each element has a primary and a secondary power. So how that works is fire is primarily warm, air is primarily moist, water is primarily cool, and earth is primarily dry. And so these are the powers that dominate when you have a system like you're exposing fire to water. Okay, so fire is the opposite of water. So it's both warm and dry, whereas water is cool and moist. But what happens is that the power that the overcoming power of fire is the warm power. And so the warm power negates the cool and transforms it into air. And fire can also be exposed to things that are flammable. You could look at, flammable fuel is something that could be exposed in that way as well. You apply the warm power, it eventually ignites. So in effect, it can go from like liquid actually to gas all the way to plasma when it ignites. And so it actually passes through the elemental phases. So it goes fire to liquid fuel, okay, it ignites. That creates a gas. And in fact, gasoline, by the way, only the gas actually ignites. So it's like the fume off of gasoline. That's what's actually being burned in your engine. And so that kind of combustion is air going to fire. So what you've got is, well, air already has the warm power. And so you apply fire to it. And so now the warm power is still the warm power. That just goes up. But then the moist power eventually is be overcome by the dry power, the secondary power, and then it burns and you get plasma, so more fire. And, whereas, with some things you can put it out with a large amount of water and so on. All this stuff has to do with general naturalistic observations of the world that were made, hundreds of years before the Common Era. And in that sense, the elemental system is actually pretty complex. And it's important to understand that, okay, while yes, it's like it doesn't take into account the molecular makeup of things. And the molecular makeup of things is important. We got modern chemistry. That was a huge improvement. Discoveries in physics showed us a lot of other things about how matter works. But these basic states of matter are things that continue to exist. In fact, matter actually has a fifth state. And, okay, so if we call spirit energy, okay, and we know matter and energy are the same thing. E equals mc squared. You can transform one into the other. Matter has a fifth state called a Bose-Einstein condensate, which is a supercooled state where all the particles, they act like this really tightly coupled structure in the matter. And so if you look at that as pure matter, and you look at electromagnetic radiation as pure energy, the other four elements, that is, the other four states of matter, simply consist of different mixtures of matter and energy. So heat up a Bose-Einstein condensate, it becomes a solid. Heat up a solid, it becomes a liquid. Heat up a liquid, it becomes a gas. Heat up a gas, it becomes a plasma. And heat, electromagnetic radiation, you're taking the matter, you're applying energy to it. And so in that sense, that is a completely modern, physical, completely normal idea about how matter works. And you can map that onto like the thelemic system of Magick. So we have this concept of active spirit and passive spirit. Okay, well, if active spirit is energy and passive spirit is matter, okay, then when you're looking at the way the pentagram rituals work, all right, so earth and water, which are passive elements, their ratio of matter to energy is more in the direction of matter. And so what you do is, so your spirit pentagram that you use with it is the passive spirit pentagram. And with air and fire, the active elements, their ratio is more tilted toward energy. So for your spirit pentagram, you use the active spirit pentagram for those. And that, again, completely lines up with modern physics. It's not really a problem. The only problem comes from this idea of taking what we call elements in the modern era and trying to apply that to, what people were thinking in ancient times. And they're just different, okay? But it is interesting to look at this idea that, that the states of matter can correspond to different magical processes and so on. And what we're really looking at is we're looking at the symbolic elements representing the structure of the universe itself. It's not that they are the structure of the universe, but they represent it. The element of fire, represents plasma. Element of air represents gas. Element of water represents liquid, and so on. And so, you could sit down and do like scientific notation with that for your states of matter. And, you might even be able to pull some interesting things out. Like, you've got things like solids that go directly to gas. How does that work? You might be able to plug that into some sort of into the Greek system, although probably the Greeks weren't exposed to anything like that. But dry ice is a classic one. Dry ice goes from solid directly to gas when it's warmed up. So you expose heat to it. It only will go through the liquid phase if it's under a lot of pressure. And so the pressure concept, that's not completely understood either back in the days of, when they were working with the 4-element system, and that was figured out later, like the triple point charts and stuff, or modern chemistry. Now, we're going to talking about this magically, now that I've gone over a little bit of the physical basis of it. So the elements are really, they're the first symbol set that generally, if you join a magical group, people will talk about working with the elements. Okay, and one of the other points I want to make is I talk about the lesser ritual, the pentagram, being a microcosmic ritual. Okay, and so some people have assumed that, that means the elements are microcosmic, right? Because, the pentagram is a symbol of the microcosm and you're using pentagrams. Well, no. All of the symbol sets of Magick, elements, planets, signs of the zodiac, have both microcosmic and macrocosmic aspects. And so the structure that you would use to work with macrocosmic elements is you would use like your lesser ritual, the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, bringing in the invoking hexagram. That shifts the scope of your operation to macrocosmic. Then you use the greater ritual, the pentagram, to conjure the macrocosmic force of the element. And so it's one of these things where the symbols aren't like entirely, completely comprehensive all the way through. So the hexagram is naturally the symbol of the macrocosm. You could do the same thing though. So if you just open with the lesser ritual, the pentagram, and then go into like an invoking ritual, the hexagram for a planet, or a sign, what you're doing is you are actually working with the microcosmic aspect of that planet or sign. So the way you set up your field, your lesser rituals, that sets the scope of your operation. The elements themselves are not exclusively microcosmic, the planets are not exclusively macrocosmic, and neither are the signs. So, from that concept, the other thing that you need to understand is that in thelemic Magick, one of Crowley's points that he makes is that each of these complete systems, the elements, the planets, the signs of the zodiac, they are complete in and of themselves. So in other words, in theory, you should be able to do anything you can do with planetary magic with elemental magic. You should be able to do anything you can do with zodiacal magic with elemental magic. I find there's a little bit of a scope shift between these in that there's a little bit of a shift, not in terms of the scope of an operation, the duration of an operation, where what's going on is that elemental magic seems like it's maybe not quite as powerful, but it works faster. Zodiacal magic is really powerful, but it's slower. And then planetary magic is somewhere in the middle. Okay? So, I mean, planetary magic, in terms of doing practical work, does represent kind of a nice compromise between those 2 points. However, just about everything you can do with planets, you can also do with elements. And maybe, well, maybe it's not as powerful, but it's faster. So, well, you can do more operations if you want. And so, just going over these. So, in Liber 777, the powers that are attributed to the elements, okay, air is divination. Water is the great work, talismans and crystal gazing. The fire is evocation and pyromancy. Earth is alchemy, geomancy, making pentacles, and travel on the astral plane. By the way, the making pentacles under Earth, that's the only one that mentions an elemental weapon. But the elemental weapons are also attributed to this. So you would use like a fire. You would use a fire operation if you were, making or consecrating a wand. Water for a cup. Air for a dagger. So, but even though pentacle is the only one that's mentioned here. So, with the exception of the vision of the genius, which is one of those rare visions that corresponds to a path, those are the practical powers that are listed. Also, the Sephirothic aspect of the elements in general maps to Malkut, and that corresponds to the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel or of Adonai. And that is, so for like a Holy Guardian Angel invocation, you're going to want to call all 4 elements in a balanced configuration. You'll see that, so you could do that with the Greater Ritual of the Pentagram. You'll see Liber Reguli also does that. You will see that Liber Samic also does that. Crowley has set up Liber Samic in such a way that the sections map to the elements and you do pentagrams. And again, it's the 4 elements in a balanced configuration and then active and passive spirit in the center. So, and this is considered, a lot of Thelemic writes, oh, you really should focus on getting your Holy Guardian Angel. And sure, you should. It's a good thing to work on. And one of the things that will get you there is working with the elements, because balanced configuration of the elements corresponds to the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel or of Adonai. Not knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. This is a vision. In other words, it's a state of consciousness in which you are receiving some information from that. Whereas when you do the full Holy Guardian Angel invocation, like with Liber Samic, what's going to happen is that's this knowledge and conversation. It's more of a back and forth. And also that operation should stabilize it to a degree anyway. It's more dependent on daily practices than some people think it is. You'd have to keep them up to keep the connection, but you skip practices for a while, it'll fade. You start doing practices again, you can get it back. So it doesn't require, oh, I skipped my practice, now I have to do like a 6-month magical. No, you don't have to do that. It doesn't work that way. But it is true that it will become less reliable if you start skimping on practices and things like that. But at any rate, the point being is that that's a pretty long list of powers, and you can do a lot of stuff with that. On top of that, the elements also have a few other attributions that do work in the areas of spells that a lot of the time people talk about planetary magic for. So healing and knowledge, that's air. That's kind of like Mercury. You have love, relationships, psychic perceptions, that's water. That's kind of like Venus and the moon. Protection and cursing are fire. That's like Mars and Saturn. And prosperity, finances, employment is Earth, and that's like Sun and Jupiter. And so you can use operations like this instead of planetary operations. And, there are differences in technique, of course, but you should be able to get similar results. With that caveat that elements tend to work a little faster, but they aren't quite as powerful. And that's really the main difference. But like I say, since they work faster, all right, so this concluded here, so now I'm going to do this. You could do a series of smaller operations to do something sort of like what you get with a planetary operation. Let's see. The elemental magic like this is still subject to astrological considerations. I've seen people say that it's not, and it is not true that the overall astrological weather, which basically affects everything. Okay, I mean, it's just what's going on now. Affects any magical operation. So you can't, one thing people, you can't like say, oh, well, the elements are sublunar, and because of that, it's not affected by the planets and signs. No, not true. any kind of magic is affected by the current astrological weather. I mean, I've had people say, oh, well, I work with just this kind of free-form, wild whatever, and I don't have to time my spells like you ceremonial magicians do. I have been told this. And my response to that, which I should have gone with at the time, but the conversation went in another direction, was that, well, yeah, but this ritual timing stuff, it's just about optimization. It doesn't mean that you can't do magic when the timing's bad. Of course you can. It just doesn't work as well. And so the reason we look at timing is to optimize our magic. I would also point out that somebody who does wild magic or elemental magic or whatever, they're subject to all the same forces we are. They're just, not aware of it. So like maybe their magic is wild because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you paid attention to that timing, it would work more often. And I am pretty confident that that is the case. So, at any rate, so working with the elements though is like it's in some ways you could think of it as easier because it's fewer general forces that you're working with. So you have the 5 or 6 elements. You have 7 planets. Maybe work with a couple of the outer planets. Like Uranus, Neptune. They get mapped onto the Tree of Life too. And then the signs of the zodiac. You have the 12 signs. So it's more forces as you go up the tree. In effect, it's a scale question. So up on the tree is like greater scale. So element is more specific and personal. Planetary is kind of in the middle, transpersonal, and then your signs of the zodiac, they are cosmic. And so what you've got is it's this structure that it's not necessarily higher or lower. That can get a lot of people, I think, into trouble thinking about it that way. But they are states of consciousness that are broader and more expansive as you go from element to planet to zodiac. Now, so technically for working with the elements in a practical context, the basic structure is you would do the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, you do the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, and then you would do the greater invoking ritual of the pentagram for the element you are working with, and you do that to all 4 quarters. So, for example, the air pentagram, it's traced in yellow. It's traced, let's see, this way. And that might get reversed on your screen. It probably will. And the god name is Yahweh. And so, and then it is preceded by the spirit pentagram, which would be the active spirit pentagram. And that's like this. And it's Ehya. Visualize that in like bright, vibrant purple. And then the pentagram of air, again, Yahweh in yellow. And you also do the rending of the veil sign and the sign of air, and but all that's laid out in the thing on the greater ritual, the pentagram. You do that to all 4 directions. So what you're doing is, it's just like working with planets. What you do is you are setting up your base field with the lesser rituals, and then you are tuning the energy of your space to the element you're working with, and then you can go ahead and do a conjuration of any of the elemental spirits. You can work with the 4 archangels from the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. So Raphael is air, Michael is fire, Gabriel is water, and Uriel is earth. Okay, so that's real basic. You can just conjure up those angels. You can also work with the elemental kings. Jin is king of fire, Gob is earth, Nixa is water, and Paralda is air. That's also a setup that works there. And if you look at my my elemental work posts, I work with those spirits. But if you specifically wanted to work with angels, you could go ahead and substitute the archangels from the lesser ritual, the pentagram, and go ahead and use a regular table of art, like a Trithemian table will work. Sigillum de Ameth will work from the Enochian system. I use that a lot. I find it works fine for non-Enochian stuff too, as far as a containment structure. And so what you're dealing with then is it's pretty much just a straight conjuration of what you're doing. Now, also, some of these powers are kind of general. And so that's kind of interesting. So air is divination. Okay, so if you're going to do a tarot reading, you can go ahead and set up your space for an air operation. And you can call on Peralta to say, hey, Peralta, help me out with this. And then do your divination. And the idea is it should work better if you do that. If you're looking at, so scrying, water, elemental water. It's like a lot of people are like, oh, I want to learn how to do visual scrying. Okay, I use mostly spirit vision because visual scrying, I can do it with this brain machine thing. It's just a pain though. And it's easier to do spirit vision. The information I find is just as reliable. So people are like, you have to see the spirit. That's not correct. You have to be able to perceive the spirit in some way, but not necessarily vision. But anyway, if you really, really want to do vision though, that would be something where, okay, you could do a water operation. You could call in Nixa or you could call in Gabrielle to help you out with that particular thing. Talismans in general is kind of interesting. So in theory, just like with the signs, that's a general power. You could maybe use that to make a talisman for anything. Haven't experimented with that. Usually, generally, I conjure the thing I'm working with to make a talisman of it, but worth thinking about. Let's see, invisibility, transformations. Transformation is like just totally the best, right? It's like the best power because you're just going to transform one thing into another. That's basically all magic, pretty much. I want to transform the current state of my life into this thing that I want. Totally fine. And so that would be something where, and in that case, that would be spirit that you would be invoking there, and but still, so you wouldn't call one of the four elements in addition to the spirit pentagrams. You would just use the spirit pentagrams. Travels on the vision of the genius, which is possibly not the same thing as the vision, which is probably not the same thing as the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel. The genius is another spirit from Agrippa, and my reading of it is it's really more like a higher self kind of concept. Some people say the Holy Guardian Angel is a higher self. It's kind of not. And there's places in Crowley where you could see, that's a little bit different. The genius, as I read it, is more like a higher self kind of idea. It's like you're self-made perfect. So, that fits in with, transformations from spirit. You invoke spirit into yourself, and you can aim for this particular vision. And so then for earth, okay, alchemy, almost anything with substances, geomancy, which I don't do a lot of geomancy, but some people really are into it, and earth would be correct for that. Making of pentacles, again, making of all the elemental weapons, the wand, dagger, cup, pentacle, all correspond to their appropriate elements. And then travels on the astral plane, which is kind of interesting for earth. But okay, so that would be like working with the spirit vision as opposed to crystal gazing for water, which would be like the eyes open scrying. Water is also attributed to the great work in general. So you could do water and, I charge you to bring me to the accomplishment of the great work, the summa bonum, true wisdom, and perfect happiness, that benediction that I like from the Gnostic Mass. It's a good benediction for your life. It's a good thing to really put your life in a direction that works well. And so one of the things about this that is very interesting, and I think some people wind up like bypassing this. They don't work with the elements as much because, I want to get these grimoires and do planetary stuff. This elemental stuff, though, is very effective, and it can work very well for all kinds of operations. Not only knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, it's like the Sephirothic, vision-based side of it with the elements in a balanced configuration, but also for all kinds of practical work, the same kinds of things that you could do with a planetary operation. What you're looking at, people want healing, they want love, they want money, and they want revenge. Okay? Seriously, breaking it down. Hopefully, when people come to Magick, they have these ideas. Hopefully, revenge is like kind of goes away because that's just dumb in my opinion. It's like you're wasting a bunch of your energy to make other people's lives worse. It's much easier to, if somebody's being an impediment to you, it's much easier to do a spell, just have them, okay, well, just like go over there so you're not an impediment anymore. And, that could be something that could be done with fire as the kind of the go away spell. And, people want money. Well, you always need money in this society. It's just the way our civilization is set up. So prosperity magic corresponding to earth is great, right? And then, okay, people want love. People get sick. I mean, and those are I think love and healing. I think are generally higher aspirations, unless you're talking about, well, I'm going to cast this like compulsion love spell on a particular person. That's not a very ethical use of magical power, but there are people who do it. You can also fascinate a woman with a piece of cheese. That's like from a grimoire. But anyway, so that being said, so the elements are not really something that I think should be overlooked. They're something that you definitely should look at and work with, and perhaps that was what some of the orders like the Golden Dawn were trying to do, where you start out with the elements, and then if you get into the inner order, and that's where like you start getting like planetary stuff, to make sure that people really did work with these and didn't just like jump ahead to stuff that was perceived as more powerful or something like that. And in Crowley's case, I think it definitely is true. Crowley was very interested in students focusing on the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, and that is fundamentally obtained by this kind of elemental schema. So getting people to know that is good and useful. I mean, even if you look at Modern Magic by Donald Michael Craig, book has more flaws than a lot of people will admit, but it does actually provide a pretty good overview of how to do elemental magic and work with the elements, if you understand the one point that the greater ritual, the pentagram, which he does include in the book, he just includes the Malkuth version with all 4 elements. If you just understand that to work with a specific element, you just do the pentagram for that specific element to all 4 directions, and that's fairly workable within that schema. And also, you say invoking ritual, the hexagram, because operant field, it works better. He didn't like it, but it works better in my experience. So, but try it both ways. I mean, if you want to do like the LBRP, LBRH, and then do the greater invoking pentagram, that's generally how it's done in the Golden Dawn. I just like using that invoking hexagram for a macrocosmic resonance. So, anyway, so basically that's kind of an overview of the elements, how they work, what they are. My next 2 videos that I post, we're gonna have an elixir right here at some point, but the next couple of videos I'm gonna post are gonna be, I'll do one on planetary magic, I'll do one on zodiacal magic. So you have these to refer back to and look at some of the individual nuances of it. I'm gonna talk about one more thing, because I keep hearing this. So this is covered in my talk on the lesser ritual, the pentagram, but I keep hearing from people that, you see, magicians, they do the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, and you trace it like an earth pentagram, so that makes you poor. Okay, no, it doesn't. Okay, that is not true. Okay, I have done that ritual for a long time. I'm very well off. I have never had an issue with poverty. And I know lots of other people who do it and have no problem with it either. And the crux of it is that even though it's traced like an earth pentagram, I have a whole article talking about lesser versus greater pentagrams, and I'm convinced it is a different pentagram. The color is different. So earth pentagram is generally black or green. Okay, well, I like to do mine in kind of candle flame orange. And Crowley, in his version that he gave to Grady McMurtry in 1945, he says golden light for the pentagrams. Even Donald Michael Craig says blue. Earth plus blue. It's like earth pentagram tracing plus blue does not equal earth. The lesser pentagram represents the microcosm in its totality. And so, that being said, if you're just doing the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram too, it's a microcosmic ritual. So it affects you. It's not really going to go out and affect your finances. But if you want to just basically fix that right up, in case you're worried about it, lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, followed by the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram. Okay? Because you will, maybe you're doing something with earth over here microcosmically. Macrocosmically, you're calling in all the forces of the elements and can work with them, including the forces of earth, which can help with your financial prosperity. So with that, I'm going to sign off on the elements. And thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of the evening. And love is the law. Love under well.